Welcome back to Everyday English Pod. You know, it's great to have everyone here for another exploration of ideas that can really make a difference. Today, we're diving into something super practical, the power of logical thinking. We've got a ton of material to sift through stuff that unpacks how using clear, structured reasoning can impact practically everything in the business world, from the smallest conversations to the biggest game-changing decisions.
Yeah, that's spot on. The cool thing about this material is that it doesn't just talk about logic in the abstract. It gets down to the nitty-gritty and gives you tons of concrete ways to apply logical thinking in real-life situations to boost your communication, make better choices, and squeeze the most out of your resources, ultimately leading to greater success for your business.
Okay, so let's kick things off with something we're both super familiar with, those everyday business discussions that are a big part of our work lives. The sources we've been looking at seem to really emphasize how structured reasoning can make a huge difference in those interactions.
Definitely. One thing that really struck me as I went through this material was how often it came back to structured reasoning as being absolutely essential for preventing misunderstandings and making sure everyone is on the same page. Think about when you're presenting a proposal. When you lay out your arguments in a clear, logical way, step by step, it just creates this really solid foundation for understanding.
It's like when you're explaining something to a friend, right? If you're all over the place, they're going to get lost. But if you walk them through it logically, it's way easier to follow.
Totally. And it's not just about making a good point either. The sources really hammer home the importance of having evidence to back up what you're saying, to support those claims with facts, data, examples, whatever it takes.
Yeah, having that solid evidence gives your arguments a lot more weight. People are way more likely to be persuaded if they can see that you've done your homework. And speaking of looking things up, the sources also mention how important it is to really consider counter arguments, those potential objections that people might have to your ideas.
Right. Which can sometimes be a bit of a pain, to be honest.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it's actually super helpful because when you address those potential objections head on, it shows that you've really thought things through.
And I bet it makes people more confident in your proposals because they know you've considered different angles.
Exactly. It just adds that extra layer of rigor and thoughtfulness. And at the end of the day, when you make your logic clear, it builds trust. People are more likely to collaborate effectively with you when they understand your reasoning, when they can see the how and the why behind your conclusions.
That makes sense. If everybody gets the thinking behind a project, they're going to be more invested in making it work. And speaking of things running smoothly, the sources touch on how having a consistent structure for communication and decision-making can help speed things up, especially for teams working on projects together.
Yeah, I found that really interesting too. Having that well-defined structure basically acts as a roadmap for everyone on the team. It helps them reach consensus faster and just makes the whole collaboration process way more efficient.
And hopefully that means fewer of those meetings where everyone leaves with a completely different understanding of what was decided.
Exactly. Clarity is key. And that's why the sources keep coming back to the importance of gathering good data to back up everything you say and being really careful about checking your sources. It's about making sure that the data you're using is accurate and relevant.
It's not just about having numbers. It's about having the right number.
Right. And then it goes even deeper. The sources talk about the value of scrutinizing your own assumptions, like really taking a hard look to see if there are any logical gaps or weaknesses in your thinking.
It's like having a built-in fact checker for your brain.
Exactly. And, sometimes that means considering alternative ideas even if they go against your initial instincts. Taking a balanced view can lead to way better collaboration and more robust solutions.
It's that classic thing of two heads are better than one, right? You never know where the best idea might come from. And the sources also highlight how that careful examination can help you catch things you might have missed. Otherwise, like maybe some crucial fact that got overlooked or even a contradiction in your own logic.
Yes, and that thoroughness acts as a real safeguard against making those careless errors that can sometimes derail a project. And documenting everything clearly so there's no room for misinterpretation just creates a record that you can always refer back to and double-check your reasoning.
Like leaving a trail of breadcrumbs so you can always find your way back.
Precisely. And then, when you explain things clearly, when your logic is solid, people are just way more likely to accept your recommendations. That persuasive clarity minimizes pushback and misunderstandings, which, let's be honest, is always a good thing.
Nobody wants to deal with unnecessary drama, right? And it sounds like the big part of that clarity comes from questioning your own assumptions. The sources mention how those hidden beliefs that we all have can sometimes weaken our logic without us even realizing it. Oh, absolutely. Those hidden assumptions can be sneaky little things. And then on top of that, you have to make sure that your conclusions are actually flowing logically from your arguments. That coherence is super important, especially when you're in those high-stakes strategic meetings.
So basically, it's all about being really thorough and deliberate in your thinking. And from what I'm gathering, the sources also emphasize the importance of keeping your team informed throughout the whole process.
Yeah, that transparency is key. When you explain the logical steps behind your decisions in a clear and open way, it builds trust and makes everybody feel more accountable for the results. When people understand the why, they're way more engaged.
And they're more likely to buy into the plan because they get the logic behind it.
Exactly. And then, to top it all off, creating those clear, concise reports that lay out the logical basis for your decisions just streamlines the whole decision-making process.
It makes everything so much easier to follow. Okay, so we've talked about how logical thinking is essential for good communication. But what about its impact on how we allocate those precious resources? Ah, yes, the all-important question of where the money goes. It's fascinating how a really logical approach can help you figure out what matters most, cut down on wasted effort and unnecessary spending, all that good stuff.
Basically, making sure that your money and your time are going to the things that will actually have a real impact.
Exactly. It's about being strategic and deliberate. When you have a solid framework, it's way easier to pinpoint those bottlenecks that are slowing things down and then make sure your resources are being directed where they'll make the biggest difference.
It's like a laser focus instead of just spraying things around and hoping something sticks.
Right. And that methodical approach to analysis also allows you to make more informed decisions about those inevitable trade-offs that come up. Choosing one thing over another. It helps you avoid those knee-jerk reactions and helps you stay focused on what's truly important. And another thing, breaking down complex processes into smaller, more manageable chunks, like the sources talk about, could really help prevent things from feeling overwhelming and make it easier to increase productivity.
It's that whole divide and conquer strategy.
Totally. But of course, you need to have ways to measure whether your resource allocation is actually working. The sources talk about the importance of setting up systems for monitoring your progress and making adjustments as needed. That way you can catch those little problems before they turn into big ones.
So it's an ongoing process, not just a one-time thing.
Definitely. It's about constantly checking in, looking at the data, seeing how things are stacking up against your initial projections. And another thing that comes up a lot is the importance of benchmarking, comparing your performance to industry standards. That can help you get a better sense of where you stand and make sure you're not falling behind.
It's like checking in with the rest of the class to see how you're doing. And, another great thing about having those logical plans is that they can sometimes highlight areas where you could be saving money, which you can then redirect to more impactful areas.
Absolutely. It's about optimizing everything you do. And transparency is super important here, too. The sources talk about how getting input from different teams and departments throughout the process can help you create a more well-rounded and realistic budget.
It's about getting everyone's perspective and making sure you're not missing anything important.
Exactly. And addressing those potential conflicts or discrepancies early on can save you a lot of headaches down the road. When you're clear from the start, things tend to move a lot smoother.
It's a much more proactive way of managing resources instead of just reacting to problems after they've already blown up. And another point the sources make is about the importance of documentation. Keeping track of the reasoning behind your spending decisions, making sure that every line item is justified, helps ensure accountability.
Absolutely. It creates that audit trail so you can always go back and see the logic behind each decision. And that level of transparency is really helpful, especially when you need to explain any unexpected changes down the line.
So no more mystery expenses showing up out of nowhere. And then on top of that, the sources talk about evaluating the overall impact of your resource allocation, making sure you're maximizing the strategic benefit of every dollar you spend.
It's about making those tough choices and being ruthless about eliminating waste. And consistently reviewing your approach helps you stay agile, which is so important in today's constantly changing business environment. You got to be able to adapt.
Agility is definitely the name of the game these days. And when you bring all of this together, the sources talk about creating a visual representation, like a matrix, that clearly shows how your objectives are connected to your resource allocation. It helps you see everything laid out in a really logical way.
Right. It's a great way to visualize the big picture and make sure your resources are aligned with your overall goals. And that kind of structured thinking often leads to a much better return on investment.
Which is what we're all aiming for at the end of the day. And it's also about building confidence in the process. When you can show those positive results, it encourages even more buy-in from everyone involved.
Absolutely. When you present those well-reasoned conclusions and highlight the cost-benefit analysis for each decision, it just reinforces the practical value of this whole approach.
So it's not just about saying, hey, this is logical. It's about showing that it makes good business sense.
Exactly. And that systematic way of thinking ultimately leads to a more efficient and effective organization. Speaking of efficiency, let's shift gears a bit and talk about how using logic can help make sense of all those business metrics that we're constantly bombarded with.
Yeah, that can definitely be a challenge for a lot of people. I know it is for me sometimes. There's just so much data coming at you from all directions.
It can feel overwhelming for sure. But that's where having a structured approach can really help. The sources talk about how using logical methods to analyze data can help you see past your own biases and start to identify those hidden patterns in the numbers.
So it's about taking all that raw data and turning it into something meaningful.
Exactly. It starts with organizing the information in a way that makes sense. Grouping similar data points together, creating categories, that sort of thing. That allows you to start making meaningful comparisons and seeing those trends emerge.
And the sources also emphasize the importance of bringing in qualitative information like customer feedback or market research to add context to the numbers. It's about combining those stories with the statistics to get a more complete picture.
Right, because numbers on their own don't always tell the whole story. And when you start looking at correlations, you can get a better sense of those potential cause and effect relationships. But of course, you have to be careful not to jump to conclusions.
Right. Correlation doesn't always equal causation.
Exactly. That's where the importance of testing your hypotheses comes in. It's about being rigorous and making sure that your interpretations are actually supported by the data. And another key point is to regularly check your data for any anomalies or outliers, those unusual data points that can sometimes skew your results.
So it's about cleaning up the data before you even start analyzing it.
Absolutely. And once you have your findings, it's important to validate them by comparing them to industry benchmarks and looking at external standards. That just adds another layer of credibility to your conclusions.
It's like saying, hey, our findings aren't just based on our own internal data. They're consistent with what's happening in the wider market.
Exactly. And then there's the whole aspect of tracking your performance over time. Using a structured framework helps you analyze trends and get a better sense of whether your business is on a sustainable path.
So you can see how things are evolving and make adjustments as needed. And I really like how the sources talk about creating those clear dashboards that visually represent the data and the logic behind any changes you're seeing. It just makes everything so much more transparent and easier to understand.
Yeah, those visual representations are super helpful for communicating complex information. And they can also help you spot potential problems early on. The sources also talk about the importance of scenario planning. Thinking through different possibilities and evaluating best case and worst case scenarios.
So you're not just reacting to what's happening, you're thinking ahead and preparing for different possibilities.
Exactly. And being aware of those key variables that can have a big impact on your business.
Yeah.
And doing those sensitivity analyses to see how different factors might play out can really help you avoid making those big costly mistakes.
It's about being proactive and anticipating those potential challenges. And another thing that struck me was the emphasis on clear and concise reporting. When you summarize your findings in a logical and easy to understand way, it just makes it so much easier for everyone to get on the same page and collaborate effectively.
Right, that shared understanding is key. And using visuals effectively is really important too. The sources talk about how a well-designed chart or graph can really bring the data to life and make it easier to grasp those complex relationships.
But it can also help prevent misunderstandings, which is always a plus.
Definitely. And it's important to be open to feedback too. Inviting others to scrutinize your analysis and having those open dialogues can help you uncover blind spots and ultimately strengthen your conclusions.
It's about being humble and recognizing that you don't always have all the answers. And the goal of all this, of course, is to refine your recommendations so that they're fully aligned with the data. That's what makes those recommendations credible and actionable.
Absolutely. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about using logic to improve communication, allocate resources, and make sense of data. Now let's shift gears and talk about how you can use logical thinking to develop those new initiatives and bring your big ideas to life.
Yeah, this is where the rubber really meets the road. You've got all these great ideas, but how do you actually turn them into something real?
Well, having a structured approach is essential, just like in all those other areas we talked about. It starts with setting clear, measurable goals. You need to know exactly what you're aiming for and how you'll measure success.
So there's no ambiguity about what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And breaking down those big, overarching goals into smaller, more manageable milestones makes the whole process less daunting and helps you track your progress along the way.
It's like climbing a mountain, right? You don't just focus on the summit, you break it down into smaller base camps along the way.
Right. And mapping out how those milestones connect to each other, showing the dependencies, creates a clear roadmap that everyone can follow. That helps reduce confusion and keeps everyone moving in the same direction. And it's crucial to get input from your stakeholders early on, too, to make sure your plans are feasible and that you have their buy-in from the start.
That early buy-in can really make or break a project.
Absolutely. When you involve stakeholders from the beginning, you're much more likely to end up with a plan that actually works. And another important point is to identify your key assumptions. Those underlying beliefs about how things will work out, and to continuously test them to make sure they're still valid.
Because if your assumptions are wrong, your whole plan could be built on a shaky foundation.
Exactly. You need to be prepared to adjust your assumptions as new information comes in. That keeps your strategy flexible and adaptable. And including a thorough risk assessment in your plan, where you outline those potential problems that could arise and how you'll address them, just adds that extra layer of resilience.
So you're not caught completely off guard if things don't go exactly according to plan.
Right. And then on top of all that, it's important to have those regular check-in points where you evaluate your progress and make sure you're still on track. That allows you to make those course corrections before things go too far off course.
It's about constantly monitoring and adjusting.
Exactly. And, keeping an eye on what your competitors are doing is important too. That helps you make sure your plan still gives you a competitive advantage.
So you're not just focused on your own internal world, you're paying attention to what's happening in the broader market.
Right. And then the final piece of the puzzle is creating that clear, compelling roadmap that lays out all the steps you'll take to achieve your vision. It's about outlining the resources you'll need, who's responsible for what, and the specific objectives you're aiming for. That level of detail helps prevent misunderstandings and duplication of effort.
It's like creating a blueprint for success.
Exactly. And once you have that blueprint, it's important to share it with all the relevant teams and get their feedback. That helps you refine the plan and build that sense of shared ownership.
So everyone feels like they're part of the process. And it sounds like that emphasis on continuous refinement is really important too. You need to be willing to adjust your plans as needed while still making sure the underlying logic remains sound.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act. And then, when you're ready to present your final plan, highlighting that logical reasoning behind every step just adds to its credibility and makes it more likely to be approved.
So it's not just about the what, it's about the why.
Precisely. Okay, so we've talked about planning for the future, but what about those moments when you need to make decisions quickly? How does logic help you act decisively without sacrificing careful consideration?
Yeah, those high-pressure situations can be tricky. You don't want to rush into things, but you also can't afford to be paralyzed by indecision.
Right, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And that's where having a clear, logical framework can really help. The sources talk about establishing those preset criteria that can guide your decision-making. Those clear guidelines that help you make those tough calls quickly and confidently.
So you're not starting from scratch every time a decision needs to be made.
Exactly. It's about having that structure in place. And another thing that comes up a lot is the importance of using a scoring system or some other objective method for weighing the pros and cons. That helps minimize those emotional biases that can sometimes cloud our judgment.
So you're making decisions based on facts and logic, not just gut feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also important to get input from different people to make sure you're considering different perspectives and that your decisions are fair and balanced.
Getting those diverse viewpoints can really help you avoid making those narrow-minded decisions. And another thing that struck me was the importance of learning from past decisions. Keeping a record of those choices, along with the reasoning behind them, can create a valuable resource for making better decisions in the future.
It's like building up a library of case studies and incorporating those feedback loops, constantly evaluating how your decisions are playing out and making adjustments as needed just keeps the whole process dynamic and responsive to changing circumstances.
So it's not just about making a decision and then forgetting about it. It's about continuously learning and refining your approach.
Exactly. And encouraging people to be transparent about their reasoning to clearly explain the logic behind their choices builds trust and accountability within the organization.
It's about making sure everyone understands the why.
Right. And then on top of that, simplifying complex criteria, making them easier for people to understand and apply, just helps ensure consistency across the board.
So everyone's working from the same playbook.
Exactly. And in those high-stakes strategic discussions, using data to support your arguments is absolutely crucial. It just adds that extra layer of credibility.
Facts over opinions, right?
Absolutely. And then the final piece is about creating those clear, standardized procedures that embed those logical checks at every step. That just minimizes the chances of errors and streamlines the whole process.
So you're building those logical safeguards into the very fabric of the organization. And it's about that constant evaluation, too, making sure that your decisions are actually moving the needle and getting you closer to your goals.
Right. You need to be able to course correct when necessary. All right. So we've talked about making decisions. Now let's talk about how you can use logic to extract those really valuable insights from all the information you're bombarded with every day. How do you turn that data into knowledge that can actually guide your actions?
Yeah, that's a big one. We're all drowning in data these days. The question is, how do you make sense of it all?
It starts with being really deliberate about what you're looking for. Defining those specific questions that you want to answer helps you avoid going down those rabbit holes and keeps your analysis focused and efficient.
So you're not just wandering around in the data wilderness, you have a map and a compass.
Exactly. And it's important to cross-reference your sources, too, to make sure that your findings are corroborated by multiple pieces of evidence. That just increases the reliability of your insights.
It's about making sure your conclusions are based on solid ground.
Right. And using those established analytical frameworks can help you interpret your findings in a consistent and meaningful way.
So you're not just making things up as you go along.
Exactly. It's about having that structure and those guidelines. And it's crucial to stay open-minded throughout the whole process. You need to be willing to adjust your initial hypotheses if the data contradicts them.
It's about letting the data guide you, even if it leads you in a direction you weren't expecting.
Exactly. And once you have those insights, it's helpful to categorize them based on their relevance and potential impact. That helps you prioritize the ones that can lead to those quick wins and keep the momentum going.
So you're focusing on the insights that can really move the needle.
Right. And summarizing those key takeaways in a clear and concise way makes it easier for others to understand and act on them.
It's about making those insights digestible and actionable. And paying attention to those unexpected findings can sometimes lead to those really innovative breakthroughs. You know, those moments where you stumble across something you weren't even looking for.
Absolutely. Those surprises can often point to those untapped opportunities or potential risks that you might have missed otherwise. And of course, it's important to double-check those extreme values in your data just to make sure they're not skewing your overall interpretation.
So you're not letting those outliers throw off your whole analysis.
Right. And standardizing the way you report your findings just makes it easier for everyone to understand and use the information consistently. That consistency is key for good communication and collaboration.
It's about making sure everyone's speaking the same language, so to speak.
Exactly. And getting feedback on how you're extracting insights, constantly looking for ways to refine your approach just helps you get better and better at it.
It's that continuous improvement mindset.
Absolutely. And ultimately, all of this leads to more informed decisions, a clear understanding of your business, and a stronger strategic direction.
So you're not just collecting data for the sake of it, you're using it to make your business better.
Exactly. And fostering that culture of collaborative analysis, where everyone feels comfortable sharing their insights and challenging each other's assumptions, just leads to a smarter, more effective organization. Okay, so we've talked about using logic to extract insights. Now let's talk about how you can leverage those insights to create truly persuasive and impactful proposals.
Yeah, this is where you take all that great thinking and turn it into action. You've got to be able to convince people that your ideas are worth investing in.
Absolutely. And persuasive logic really comes down to a few key things: clarity, strong evidence, and a well-structured argument. You need to back up every claim you make with solid, verifiable data.
So you're not just making assertions, you're presenting a case that's built on a foundation of facts.
Exactly. And it's important to anticipate those potential counterarguments and have those rebuttals ready to go. That shows that you've really thought things through and that you're prepared to address any concerns people might have.
It's about being proactive and anticipating those objections.
Right. And then The structure of your argument is important too. You need to present your points in a logical sequence that's easy for people to follow.
So you're guiding your audience through your line of reasoning step by step.
Exactly. And using clear, concise language is essential. You don't want to lose people in a sea of jargon or overly complicated phrasing.
Keep it simple, keep it straightforward.
Right. And whenever possible, use real-world examples to illustrate your points. That helps make those abstract concepts more concrete and relatable.
People are more likely to buy into an idea if they can see how it applies to their own lives or their own work.
Absolutely. And summarizing your key findings and using visuals to reinforce those points can really help drive your message home.
Visuals are a great way to keep people engaged and make that information more memorable.
Definitely. And it's important to highlight those benefits for your audience, to show them what's in it for them and why they should care.
Make it clear what they stand to gain.
Exactly. And, being open to feedback and willing to adjust your arguments as needed shows that you're flexible and that you respect other people's perspectives. That can go a long way in building trust and creating a more collaborative environment.
It's about being open to dialogue, not just delivering a monologue.
Right. And of course, you need to make sure that all your facts are accurate, double check everything. Any factual errors can really damage your credibility. And then finally, end with a clear, concise recap of your main points and the logic behind your proposal. That helps solidify your message and leave a lasting impression.
So you're leaving them with a clear takeaway.
Exactly. And mastering those persuasive logic techniques is just so valuable for anyone who wants to be successful in business. It's about being able to communicate your ideas effectively, build buy-in, and get things done.
Okay, so we've talked about all these different aspects of logical thinking, how it impacts communication, decision-making, resource allocation, data analysis, planning, action, and even persuasion. It's pretty clear that logic isn't just a nice-to-have skill. It's absolutely essential for success in today's business world.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And it's not just about individual skills either. It's about building a culture of logical thinking within your organization where everyone is encouraged to think critically, challenge assumptions, and make decisions based on reason and evidence.
So it's about creating an environment where those logical thinking habits are ingrained in everything you do. And by adopting those clear, consistent approaches to reasoning, prioritizing facts over gut feelings, and training your teams to think systematically, you can create a much more effective and innovative organization.
Exactly. It's about building that foundation for success.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the power of logical thinking, I'd love to hear from you, our listener. What's one area of your work or your studies where you're now inspired to apply a more logical, systematic approach? What's one small change you can make that might lead to big improvements over time?
That's a great question to reflect on. Even those small, consistent efforts to be more deliberate in your thinking can make a real difference.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Everyday English Pod. We hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights that you can apply in your own life. Remember, logic isn't just for philosophers. It's a powerful tool that can help you achieve amazing things.
And we're here to support you on that journey. Keep those logical minds engaged, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Until then, keep thinking, keep learning, and keep those logical wheels turning.